88 deaths every month in Ireland are directly attributable to alcohol, and an estimated €3.7 billion is spent on the problem every year. Ireland's relationship with alcohol has always been dysfunctional, but is enough being done to deal with the problem and support those who have been affected by alcoholism? National Alcohol Awareness Week runs throughout this week and is looking at how other people's drinking can affect us. It's a pleasure to welcome to the studio this morning. We have musician and singer, of course, and founder of the Rise Foundation, Francis Black, and Professor Robin Room. He is the director of the Centre for Alcohol and Policy Research at the University of Melbourne, and advisor to the World Health Organisation on alcohol-related issues. You're both most welcome. Francis,
Thank you.
Tell us about your experience with alcohol.
Well, I'm in recovery, and I've spoken very openly about my own story about being in recovery from alcoholism for a long, long time now. In fact, I went to Stanhope Street in 1988, which is nearly 30 years ago. But I suppose my own experience, I am intrigued by the power of addiction, and you just never know when it's going to creep up on you. And as a result of that, I went back to college to become a therapist, and went to work in the Rutland Treatment Centre, which I loved the work there, loved working with those who were trying to get into recovery. But what I really saw was the heartache for the family member, the family who have been impacted by it, by addiction. So I decided that there needed to be a treatment centre, run just like the Rutland, but for the family member. So I now have founded an organisation called the Rise Foundation that supports family members who have somebody they love in addiction. We don't deal with the person in addiction at all. So, and really it's going from strength to strength. We've programmes now, in Uri and Portlaoise and Kilkenny and Dublin and Swords. And so I suppose that's my experience of, I'm very passionate about family members and trying to help families who are really, really impacted by having something heartbroken, really, not even impacted, heartbroken and stressed and worried and anxious about having somebody that they love in addiction. So that's really I hope that explains.
Okay, and we'll come back to the Rise, and we'll come back to the way this conference in the Convention Centre today and tomorrow focuses on the impact on co-workers, on family members in relation to those who have an alcohol dependency problem. But just for those listening, because, this is not a black and white area, in my opinion, insofar as that, yes, I know people who are in AA and they had a really, really serious problem, and they're only one drink away from, going through a catastrophic phase in their life. But how do you define the heavy drinker, the one, who considers himself a social drinker, and those who have a problem? Could you just relay for us, you would have been working as a singer, musician, in a social ambience where drink would have been freely available. When did it dawn on you, and how did it dawn on you personally? Because I think this would help people. I might have a problem here.
Yeah. Well, I suppose I wasn't actually working in the music industry at the time. I was only in my 20s, 2 small children, and I had broken marriage behind me, and things were difficult. But I'm not blaming that, trust me. I think I started to drink wine, and wine was my drink. And, you think today, people think, bottle of wine a night is okay after a long day's work, and that was my alcohol, that was my drinking. And I wouldn't even drink every day. I wasn't. People think in their minds that an alcoholic is somebody who reaches out for the spirits first thing in the morning. That's not what my pattern was. I would, be okay until maybe 6 or 7 in the evening, and I'd be fine. I'd just get through, bring the kids to school, all of that. And then at 7 o'clock in the evening, I'd have my bottle of wine when I was cooking the dinner. And I would have it, and then I'd have that the same. And then at the weekend, I was separated, so the kids would go to their dad, and I would drink more. But what I didn't like, for me, was the powerlessness of it, and I couldn't not have it. I tried to stop drinking and I couldn't not have it. So that's what really triggered something for me. And I'd read an article about a journalist in the newspaper about her relationship with alcohol, where she would come in the evening, have a gin and tonic, and then make her dinner, and then have a bottle of wine, and then she'd have a few more gin and tonics. And she ended up going to Stanhope Street. And I just said I'd go and see if they would help me to maybe not drink as much. That's really why I wanted to go.
But what's the difference between it being a problem and not being a problem?
Well, I was dependent on it. For me, I was dependent on it, and I felt it was impacting me in a way where I was waking up in the morning where I'd have a hangover for after drinking a bottle of wine or a bottle and a half of wine. That would impact me, but also it was just that feeling now, the preoccupation all day, every day when I was going to have my bottle of wine. So that's the way it impacted me. But I think Dr. Robin would probably answer it more better for you.
Dr. Robin Room, you're most welcome. Could you give us... Like, a lot of people would be listening to Francis and say, that's pretty normal behaviour.
Yeah,
I mean, like, a lot of people would think, well, it's part of the day I'm going to look forward to. You know, I've had a hard day, but I've done my bit for the day, and now I just want to chill out before the next day starts. How do you decipher whether it's a problem or whether it's a pleasure?
Yeah, well, it's a both often, you know. That's the problem with it. In fact, it's our drug. It's the one that most of us have the most experience with. And so we think of it in very familiar terms. But it's actually one of the dirtiest drugs there is, both in terms of the effects on the drinker, his body, but also on the effects on people around them. Very often, one of the signals that you'll get is that your family starts saying things to you. Your spouse starts leaving out articles from Reader's Digest, hoping you'll read them. That these kinds of very, very soft interventions where someone is saying, look, you know, this is really getting out of hand a bit. And that's something to be listening to.
But for the listener, is there a kind of tipping point where you need to have a chat with yourself about this?
Well, I mean, from my point of view, I would say that don't think of it only in terms of the straight out alcoholism. Think of it in terms of what's the balance of alcohol in your life? Is it having some bad effects that you're sort of brushing aside essentially? And so it can be that you only drink on the weekend, and therefore you can't be an alcoholic. People will make these arguments to themselves. An alcoholic is always someone who's drinking more than I do. It's really being honest with yourself about, is this actually getting in the way of anything? Is it mean that I'm not carrying out my responsibilities in some way or another? People have to take me home. What's going on in terms of my life?
Robin, I mean, you're based in Melbourne. You've worked all around the world, the United States, Canada, Sweden, Australia. I mean, I have to ask you, as kind of an outsider to hear, what do you make of Ireland's relationship with alcohol? Do you think we have a unique drug culture, or is it just on the high end of the scale internationally?
It's on the high end of the scale. I mean, you can actually point to some cultures where there's more problems, I think, than in Ireland. But there's no question that Irish ancestry people tend to have problems with alcohol at a fairly high rate in countries like Australia and America, where many have migrated.
Do we know why that is? Is there? It's hardly a physiological thing.
There were plenty of theories. So when I was a young researcher and reading it up, there was a lot of stuff about Irish American drinking, for instance. A lot of talk about how the Irish farm, the son didn't inherit the farm until the father died, and that meant, and he couldn't get married until he had the farm, and that meant that he was a bachelor for a very long time. But, that was a particular circumstance in Ireland at a particular time. But there's no question that this is something that is, that cultures have their own way of dealing with alcohol, and that changes relatively slowly, although the consumption can go way up and down when there's a temperance movement, for instance, as there was very strongly in Ireland.
Yeah, of course.
And
Father Matthew.
Yeah, Father Matthew, and then later than that, also the pioneers and so forth. Yeah.
Okay, you're listening to Newstalk Breakfast with Ivan Yates and Shane Coleman. It's Alcohol Awareness Week. We're talking about the impact alcohol can have on your life, and indeed has on Irish culture. Robin, it strikes me two ways of addressing this. There's the kind of the prohibition kind of way, if you want to use that general term. And there's the trying to change our culture. Now, I have to say, personally, I'm more inclined towards trying to change the culture. You look at countries like Italy and Spain, alcohol is widely available there. It's available in all shops. In Portugal, you can even buy it in a vending machine. you don't see people falling around the street drunk in those countries.
This is a wonderful ambition that not only Ireland has. When I was working in Sweden, they always wanted to turn into a continental drinking culture, and it's true in the US as well. I went looking for the Swedes at what was the historical experience for that. Could you find cultures in which the drinking culture had changed very radically, and particularly could you find it where it had happened from the top down, where someone had decided as a matter of policy we're going to change the drinking culture. It's very difficult to find examples like that. You can find big shifts in the amount of drinking in the culture, but the pattern of drinking doesn't change that much. So that if you look in Australia, for instance, in the 1930s, a combination of the Depression and the temperance movement, people drank a quarter of what they drink now. But it still was the same pattern of drinking essentially, and you can see that also in Ireland. We used to, when I was first in the field, we used to sort of puzzle about the fact that Irish American and Irish Australian drinkers had a very high rate of problems, essentially, but there didn't seem to be a high rate in Ireland, and we thought there was something special about the migration experience. But then the Celtic Tiger came along, and the restrictions here on the availability of alcohol got removed, and alcohol was available in every supermarket, and lo and behold, the Irish began drinking like the Irish Australians and the Irish Americans.
So do you think that it is cause and effect? Do you think prohibition is the way to go?
No, I don't think prohibition's the way to go, but I think the controls are the way to go.
I don't literally mean, but I mean cutting back on the hours off licenses or open on the places.
You've got to think about how it worked with drink driving, how it's working with tobacco. It's a combination. The culture changes, certainly. People feel very differently about each other if they see someone getting their keys and getting in a car when they've had a few drinks than they would have felt 30 years ago. That's a combination of a change in the law and in the regulations and a change in the culture.
Frances,
the two things back each other up.
I do, absolutely. I do think it's a combination of so many things, and I think, it's vital to get the message out there to people. And how do you do that? Well, I believe you start within the family. I really do believe that you start getting the message into the homes. And I think the only way you can do that is obviously people who are impacted by it on a daily basis. When you're living with somebody and you're heartbroken and you don't know how to cope with it, and then you try and find a way of educating that person through education and therapy, and then you move out into the communities. You set up programs for communities. You look at the preventative methods. I think it's vital that we look at prevention, and I don't know if the government are doing that yet. Maybe they are. I hope they are. They're looking at preventative ways of dealing with this, and if we can break the cycle or break the legacy of alcoholism in some way by getting to the families, the communities and society in general, then it's a slow way of doing it. But I think because it's such an insidious disease, it's such an insidious thing, and it's rife to our culture, it's the only way we can move forward, and to do exactly what Dr. Robin said as well, is work from the top down and work from the bottom up. That's the way I see it. I mean, we have a no smoking ban at the moment, and which nobody thought that was ever going to work, and all of a sudden it did, and it took 10 years, even more, maybe 15 years to get to that point. So if we start a movement now, I think we could be changing lives, saving lives. It costs the government 3.7 billion. You said it yourself. If they would even put in a few million into preventative methods, I think it would be fantastic.
The theme of the particular conference, the 2-day conference, is alcohol's harm to others. What's the specific point that's going to come across, do you think? Like you spoke about the RISE Foundation, your own group, that was really focused on co-workers and family relatives? It's
only families we deal with at the moment. We'd love to have funding to go working with workers as well, but it's only for family members at the moment. Well, I think, in the report that came out by Dr. Anne Hope, which was a fantastic report that came out last week, what that report is saying, 1 in 4 people are impacted by having somebody that they love with an alcohol problem.
What support do they require?
Well, I think they need serious, first of all, emotional support. So an awful lot of family members who come to us are in crisis, and it's not that they're in a place where their loved one is beating them up or wrecking the house. It's not about that. It's you have a son or a daughter or a husband or a wife who you're watching going down this road of self-destruct. You this trauma and the stress and the anxiety of that, is so high that you'll start to lose your own thinking. You don't know whether you're thinking straight or not. So stress is huge for family members. So it's to try and bring them back down, de-stress them, and then help them and give them the tools to cope with it.
Robin, I was reading there, one of the contributors was saying that alcoholism kills relationships. So now we're focusing on the harm it does to other people, the people who aren't the alcoholics, the partner, the child, and so on. What support, other than walking away from the situation, do you think needs to be put in place to help those around the alcoholic?
Yeah, I think one of the things is to recognise that it's there as an issue. Someone was trying to study the effects on teenagers of really heavy drinking parent. And they went to the treatment agencies and they couldn't get any teenagers to talk to because the treatment agencies never asked about whether there were children around the alcoholic who was being treated, So fundamentally, if you look, I don't know the situation in Ireland, but in general, if you look at alcohol and drug specific treatment agencies, the specialised services, they're basically focusing on the drinker. They're not paying attention much out of that. Same way health services generally do with respect to someone who's coming in with a health problem.
And really, is it to tell those people to apply the best techniques to the alcoholic to reform them?
Yeah.
Or is it to tell them to stick in there, that if they abandon them, it'll make it worse? What is the key message?
Well, the key message is going to vary with who you talk to in the circumstance. Certainly if you go to Al-Anon, which is, after all, an organisation which deals, specifically with people who are usually the partner of an alcoholic, they'll say, look, they're not telling you to go to throw them away and go away, but they're saying you've got to get on with your own life. You can't simply arrange your life around this person's problem.
Yes, I mean, I think it's vital that you get the message out to family members about looking after themselves first. For example, Shane, and I'll give you an example of, say, if we have an alcoholic father, we'll take the father as the alcoholic in the family home, and the mother's preoccupation with him, even though he's not a violent man, but she's preoccupied with him. So her every waking moment, she wakes up thinking, what's the day going to bring? Is he going to go drinking for the day? What's he going to be like when he comes home? Will he kill somebody else? Will he kill himself? That preoccupation takes the mother away from the children. The children end up not having any parents.
That does make sense.
So as a result of that, the children start to take care of themselves, and they'll start to either become caretakers or they might go into alcoholism. The example, they might start to drink excessively themselves. So what we try and do with the Rise Foundation is to try and get the family, first of all, to become obviously aware of the problem, to deal with, say we will work with the wife, say the mother, and work with her to bring her back to herself, to work on letting go of his behaviour, not of him. That's really important, because people think, oh, tough love, I can't let him go. But just to let go of the behaviour, to not get sucked into...
To detach the behaviour from the person.
Detach the behaviour from the person, not get sucked into the black hole of addiction, is what Stephen Rowan often says.
Okay, guys, there's loads of texts coming through. I do want to get to some of them before we close. Barry has called in to say, I'm 13 years sober, take it one day at a time. The only person who could save me was myself. I had to want to help myself. AA saved me, and I am a proud member. Thanks for that call, Barry. Another texter says, as a partner of a recovering alcoholic, I find the moods and paranoia much harder to deal with. Joe has a question, a couple of questions actually. Francis, would you consider extending to gaming addiction? Many young adults and children have it, and parents are not aware of the developing addiction. I presume you're
we do all addictions.
You do
we do all addictions. We do alcohol, drugs, and would you believe our third one for an awful lot of family members, particularly wives, is sex addiction. Okay. So the heartbreak around sex addiction is very, very painful for family members.
Another texter has a question. Sorry, it's just gone from my screen there. Does a member of the family have to be in treatment before a family member can avail of the Rise?
No, you can be living with active addiction. You can be, you can, whatever. It's just about the impact
Robin,
on family.
Here's a question for you. My brother is an alcoholic. However, he gave it up for nearly 2 years. As of recently, he decided to start drinking again and believes he can now control it. Is this possible? What do you think I should do?
Yeah. It's possible. It's not in various ideologies that it is, but it is possible. But what you find is actually there are places, if you go look at the treatment system, there are some treatment places that say you've got to absolutely abstain. and that makes it much more likely that people will abstain. But some of the folk end up drinking moderately from that. If you go to places that are treating people and trying to teach them how to be moderate drinkers, you find a lot of them end up abstaining. So that actually, whatever the ideology of the treatment is, basically some people find they can make it work one way, and some people find they just can't make it work that way. And it's basically up to them to. If he insists on trying it, then he's on warning that there's real risks with it.
Final word to you, Frances?
Well, I suppose just to answer that question, I couldn't have cut down, and I think a lot of people out there who might be in recovery today would find it difficult to cut down. But in saying that, I would just say, if there is, come to the conference tomorrow if you're interested in this area, because it really will give you
is it open to the public?
It is open to the public, isn't it, tomorrow?
So.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let me tell you more about the conference. It's Alcohol Awareness Week this week. It's Alcohol Forum, all one word, in blockcapitals.org. You can call 074 912 5596, and you can also email info@alcoholforum.org. That is this. I want to thank Frances Black. I should have got a tune out here.
Can I just say before I finish that if you are a family member, please don't hesitate to check us out at the Rise Foundation.
Yeah, how can they contact the Rise?
Just go into www.therisefoundation.ie and fill out the inquiry form, and we have some new programmes coming up in Portlaoise and Newry in the next couple of weeks. So it would be this is a perfect time.
And that's a dedicated support organisation for those who are living with the problem.
Run by qualified therapists.
That's Frances Black. Thank you, Frances, musician and founder of the Rise Foundation, and Professor Robin Room. He's all the way from the University of Melbourne. He's advisor to the World Health Organization, and they are both speaking at the Convention Centre in this Alcohol Forum that's on today and tomorrow. Thank you both for being our guests. We'll have more shortly.